immigration, top issue in New Hampshire for Republican voters, top issue in Iowa. Huge. If you were watching and consuming any conservative media, this is it, number one. And if you are looking at GOP voters and others, if you want to say like the main reason people are going to vote Trump, this is the issue. And now we are seeing a major standoff. You guys did a great job yesterday of covering the Supreme Court case, but there's been some major development now since, which is after the Supreme Court issued an order where they said that Texas officials cannot obstruct federal Border Patrol agents from cutting the wire. They have now began actually putting even more razor wire at that border crossing, which has now become like a critical juncture. Now, I was explaining this to you, Ryan. People are, many people, including the Texas governor, are showing, they're making this a big show. Many GOP governors joining them as well, being like, that's right, like he's defying the law technically. And I asked some of my Republican lawyer friends, I said, okay, what's going on here? Yeah. So the technical explanation is this. The court order says, well, you can't obstruct the feds from cutting the wire, but that doesn't mean you can't put up a ton more wire. Yeah. So there's definitely a little bit of a loophole. It's certain, almost certain the Biden administration, they either may challenge this in court, they could send the feds and the military, they could try and federalize the Texas National Guard, which is putting this up. There are all kinds of very interesting possibilities. Jorge Ventura, he's a great reporter over at News Nation, actually did a segment showing how the Texas officials actually putting up even more razor wire after the decision yesterday. Let's take a listen to some of his report.
Texas officials say they are going to hold the line and double down on their operations inside Shelby Park. Actually, right now we're witnessing Texas officials installing even more of that razor wire and anti-climbing fencing. Now, the reason why they're installing some of that razor wire and fencing on top of the shipping containers is we have witnessed several migrants going on top of the shipping containers and entering Shelby Park illegally that way. Texas officials say they're going to continue to beef up security here. As of right now, federal agents are still not allowed in Shelby Park. We're going to take a look at the scene over here. We're actually witnessing right now migrants that have actually been blocked by that razor wire. They say they've been here for at least 2 days. Here we have 3 migrants from Venezuela who cannot enter Shelby Park illegally. So this is exactly what the state of Texas is trying to do.
So that was a important view kind of into the whole standoff. I know you guys covered it a little bit yesterday, but I think the background on all of this is obviously we've had between 6 and 8 million people cross the border illegally since Biden took office. This has led to massive debates about catch and release, about the Remain in Mexico policy, about our asylum laws. We could probably do an entire episode just on the background of this. But the main political issue is that the scenes of just like millions of people coming across, I think everyone can just agree like this is not an orderly process. Yeah, and it's like, and that's where I think the Biden administration suffers, is that there have not been 3 years now in a policy that they have been able to find, other than the original Trump policy, which was just straight up remain in Mexico, meaning you have to apply for asylum there, and then if you're adjudicated and approved, you can enter. Where if you were trying to, and you are allowing people basically to enter the border, and you're doing it even crossing illegally, but then declaring asylum, and then trying to adjudicate that here, if you're not going to hold them in some sort of detention center, catch and release is the inevitable outcome. And there's varying data. Liberals like to say that there's a 90% show up rate to the first court hearing. Conservatives are like, yeah, but what about the final court hearing whenever they lose their asylum claim? There's a lot of adjudication over asylum itself. But overall, Ryan, I think this is a sleeper potent issue, and I have not seen the mainstream media actually catch up to it yet. I've seen I saw coverage of the SCOTUS ruling, but this particular one with Governor Abbott basically saying, I'm going to defy this, I have not seen it yet. Before we get into Governor Abbott's statements, do you have anything you want to go into?
Just that it's fascinating how, like you said, little of an issue this is both among the mainstream media, but also among Democrats.
Yes.
Like Democratic voters,
They just want to pretend. Yeah.
They're like, don't care.
Right. It's very odd.
Yeah. If they see some images at the border, they might say, oh, that doesn't look great.
Right.
It's not very rational. But they're not going to expend any political capital on it. They're not going to criticize Biden. They're in such a difficult jam because their kind of ethics around immigration were forged in the Trump years, and they took, I think, some positions because they were anti-Trump that they don't actually hold. They became far more kind of pro-immigrant and pro-immigration than a lot of their kind of actual instincts
let's be real,
base
right?
are.
Yeah.
But they were driven by animus towards Trump. And so with Trump gone, now they're like, we actually are not that pro-immigrant.
Yeah, well,
now,
not even
but now we're kind of stuck because we have signs in our yard.
Exactly. And I think a lot of them are beholden to a lot of these immigration groups. You know, I maintain the literal most genius move that these governors did was, all right, you guys are sanctuary cities, we're just going to ship them to you. You guys can deal with it. You have all these laws, right to shelter, et cetera. And now all of a sudden you've got Long Island Republicans and others sounding like people down in Texas. They're like, this is crazy. They're taking our housing, and you got people sleeping in Boston airport. And I mean, the clips on this stuff, I cannot emphasize this enough, go viral in the right on such a level that to a certain point, other than those who are dealing with this, like in Chicago, you know, California and New York, they are living, people like Democrats and Republicans are living in a different reality. But this is one of those, I think, reality forcing events, specifically because it might lead to confrontation between the state of Texas and the federal government. So Texas Governor Abbott put out a statement yesterday. Let's put this up there on the screen. And can we bring our nice little highlight function there? And I'm going to read this. He says, President Biden has violated his oath to faithfully execute immigration laws enacted by Congress. Instead of prosecuting immigrants for the federal crime of illegal entry, President Biden has sent lawyers into federal courts to sue Texas for taking action to secure the border. President Biden has instructed his agencies to ignore federal statutes that mandate detention of illegal immigrants. The effect is to illegally allow their en masse parole into the United States. By wasting taxpayer dollars to tear open Texas border security infrastructure, President Biden has enticed illegal immigrants away from the 28 legal entry points along the state's southern border, bridges where nobody drowns, and into the dangerous waters of the Rio Grande. Let's go to the next one, please, because this is an important pullout. They say, for these reasons, I have already declared an invasion under Article 110, Clause 3 to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. Now, as I said, all of this is being framed by the Texas governor and by DeSantis. You know, even Governor Youngkin backed him up. They're like, yeah, he's standing up to President Biden. I want to be very clear. They're not in violation of the Supreme Court agreement or the Supreme Court ruling. The loophole is, as long as you don't obstruct the feds from cutting the wire, you can still keep putting up wire. Now, will the feds take them to court and say, hey, you need to stop? I don't know. I mean, that seems politically pretty nuts on their part. But, you know, it's one of those where they're in a major standoff because let me give the Biden case. The Biden case here is that the Border Patrol needs secure access to all points along the border. That's their case.
And
the border
Constitution gives gives
the Constitution
president, the executive,
gives the federal government and the authority in order to take control and to have supreme governance over border policy, even if you should disagree with it. Texas is like, no, this is our border, state border. In the Constitution, they have the ability to invoke that invasion clause, which is one that goes back a long time. You're speaking to a native Texan here, and we take it very seriously. The ability, the whole Jade Helm or whatever during Obama and all of that, invoking the Texas bringing up the Texas National Guard to guard against Obama and the federal government. This is deep within our DNA. Yes. My only point just being that at that time, that was definitely political. This time, I think this is, and I think political in the wrong way. Maybe good for Texas at the time, but not nationally. This time, because it's a forcing function to get the media and others to grapple with it, I think they're in a tough spot because effectively what the Biden administration is saying is if they do challenge this, is they're like, no, we need more unfettered access for people to be able to cross the border. The Biden administration, they're not stupid. They know this is a huge problem for them. But the groups, obviously, these immigration groups and others, are the ones who are like, no, you need to go through. I've seen people like Beto O'Rourke and other Texas Democrats saying, no, the federal government should go in there and cut the wire. I mean, it's one of those where I just think politically, given where national sentiment is on this, and immigration is the #1 issue where Biden loses amongst the general public and amongst independents, he's in a tough spot with this case. And as long as Texas and all of them are, whatever, in the spirit, violating the spirit but not the letter of the law, I think they're coming out on top in this debate, Ryan. Yeah,
and there's no better kind of epitome of our failed immigration policy than if you had a bunch of kind of Texas Rangers laying down razor wire, followed by a bunch of CBP guys cutting it right behind them.
What is happening?
And then behind them is a bunch of Rangers laying more down. And you've got hundreds of guys just fighting over razor wire. Right. And then you've got immigration crisis around the rest of
a bunch of Haitians and Venezuelans and Somalis being like, hey, can I come in here?
With a system last updated in the 1980s, and our immigration policy now is depending on who's in the White House they just execute it like wildly differently, and then fight about it in the courts until they're thrown out of office and somebody else comes in.
It is really unfortunate, actually, because any serious effort to try and do anything about this has been killed, basically left and right. And even the Biden administration, I mean, they just, they look ridiculous.
Talk about it in a minute, yeah.
They just look ridiculous. And John Kirby, we're going to put this, we can play some of this when he was asked about the razor wire. These people are like twisting themselves into knots, literally, to try and to defend the policy of which currently stands, and which, they're trying to stand up to Texas, but then they're also not trying to endorse like completely open border. Let's take a listen to what they said.
Does razor wire work?
Does razor wire work for what? Does it work for the Border Patrol to allow them to have the access they need to be able to better process people that are trying to get across the border? I don't think so, and that's why we asked for it to be removed.
So, yeah, there you go. It's like work for what? But the problem
when
is...
Trump was asked if the airstrikes are working.
Exactly. It's a problem that they have.
Did the bombs blow up?
Right. The problem that they have is that the Border Patrol Union is like, no, we need this. Like, we actually need people to cross in an orderly fashion at the legal entry points. That's kind of where the major standoff
The
goes.
migrants would want that too. Like everybody.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that's why there's a bunch of guys waiting on the other side of that. But look, maybe. I think the major point is, this is part of what obscures it as well. This razor wire, this is a dent in the issue, all right? Like, the major problem is, yeah, you can basically walk into this country and be like, I fear for my life, and you can stay here for like 2 or 3 years while your case is adjudicated, even though you're an economic migrant, and you get a work permit from the federal government. Now, listen, I think that's crazy, and I don't think that should be allowed. A lot of people, though, they do think that.
I'm pretty sure you don't get a work permit, which creates this underclass of...
Well, okay.
Or it's very hard to get the work
permit. So you can get the work permit. Some people don't get the work permit. This also comes to the whole question around E-Verify. The Biden administration has been much more liberal in terms of, and I mean in terms of like handing out.
Well, they gave a bunch of
permits.
Venezuelans work permits, but if you're not them, like,
there's different legal
really hard to get.
minutia that goes into this as to whether you have a legitimate asylum claim. And I know that this is very, very difficult, and it can also be very emotional because it's like, well, what qualifies as asylum or not? It's like, if you literally are being gunned down by gangs in the street, does that qualify as asylum? Some people would say yes. I personally would say no, because I would say it's like, listen, that's a domestic problem and that's your issue. If you want better government, you guys can deal with it in your house. Ryan, I'm sure you're about to throw in my face, like, well, it's your fault that those gangs exist in the first place. I'm like, well, yeah, that's technically true, but at a certain point, it's like,
I like that we can just have this conversation.
I
don't even need to be here for it.
I've done this so many times. It's like, I've been sitting here so many times. So, I mean, I guess what we can come to some sort of consensus, at least on this, is that the problem is that the incentive to fix it is also very low. And perfect example of this, let's put this up there on the screen, is that Mitch McConnell just yesterday told a closed-door meeting of Senate Republicans that the politics of the border, quote, has now flipped for Republicans, casting doubt on the ability for any sort of Ukraine border deal. He says the politics have changed, and because he says Trump, who he's referred to now as the nominee, wants to run his 2024 campaign centered on immigration, and the GOP leader says, we don't want to do anything to undermine him. Demonstrating, I mean...
And what he means by undermine.
Yeah.
Because normal people might not understand that what they mean by undermine is implementing their preferred policy.
Well, okay, so so I'll give the defense. The defense is that any sort of bipartisan deal would undermine the total preferred policy of the Republicans and Trump. So why would we compromise now when Trump, the nominee, not only wants to run on the issue, but if he wins, then he can implement his policy? Now, I will give you the counters to that. And by the way, I do not support the bipartisan immigration deal. I am a pretty big border hawk, but I do live in the reality of the system. And I can tell you that when Trump had unified control of Congress and he was the president, he also was not able to get comprehensive border deal done. Those are the facts. I just want to be very clear. The issue, too, is that unless you have a 60-vote majority or whatever in the Senate, you're going to have to go bipartisan there no matter what, especially because they're not going to kill the filibuster. You're going to do a bipartisan deal now, or you're going to do it in the future. More likely, you're just going to do it never, because the issue actually does work very well politically for most people. Yeah,
I'm just so used to Democrats coming up with excuses for why they can't do things and how they're going to do things in the future, that whenever I hear it from any party, it's like, you would rather this just be a giant mess than actually solve the problem. So if you want to solve the problem, what I would tell Republicans, Democrats are flat on their back right now. They're ready to trade away the entire store, steal it from them, and then if you do take power in the future, be even more terrible.
And it's possible. I do think it's. I do think that.
And that's the end of my Republican consulting.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I do think that one of the major problems for the Republicans in that right now was that a large portion, I would say half or so of the caucus, they didn't even want Ukraine aid anyways. So they're like, why would I compromise with you on the border?
Yeah.
They're like, I'm not going to hold you. You know, I don't care about Ukraine. I don't care about Ukraine aid. You're the one who cares about Ukraine. You're like, I'm sitting here and I'm just negotiating on the border. So I think that political calculus behind it was very stupid from the beginning. And also, what everybody forgets is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson said, I don't care what you guys are doing. Right. You either do H.R. 2, which is the House Republican bill, or nothing. That's the only thing I would agree to.
Right, because Johnson's already going to have to
he's in trouble.
He's going to shove a spending bill down the right wing's throat in the House. He's like, now you want me to do something else they don't like too? Like, get out of here. So it is that funny situation where the Senate likes to operate as if the House doesn't exist. Like, that's kind of, it's almost in the Constitution that the Senate will pretend the House doesn't exist.
Right.
And then they will pass all these things and they'll find out the House is like just not interested in playing it along with them.
My question for you is, how do you think that Biden will handle this? Do you think he will escalate to the court? Or do you think, because right now the media is not paying attention and it's just a Republican story, this is not a bad thing for Biden, right?
Emily made a really interesting point by elevating some reporting that it looks like Biden may have cut a deal with AMLO. What Biden will try to do is reduce the number of images that we're seeing along the border that will damage him politically. One way you do that is you work with the Mexican government and say, what do you need? And there were a lot of reports that Trump did the same thing, that in election years, he talked to the Mexican government and either he wants a caravan or he doesn't want a caravan, or, you know, whatever he can do. The Mexicans do have a significant amount of power to, you know, block people down, you know, from using the train system, from down at the border, down with Guatemala, and otherwise to influence what we're seeing at the Mexico-U.S. border. So I think Trump will do a lot of that because he's got that he has leeway over. That's foreign policy. Pick up the phone, AMLO, look, buddy. Now, no, AMLO then has political decisions he has to make about whether or not he wants to do that, or whether or not he wants to, how much he wants to anger Trump, because you have this weird irony that Trump would actually be upset because he wants more chaos at the border.
That's true.
So he can complain about the chaos. It's all cynical, top to bottom, all the way down.
Yeah, it's very
both parties.
It's honestly very sad. It is actually a tragic situation because, you know, what we're talking about this in politics and all that. We're talking about millions of people.
People's lives.
These are people's lives. Yeah, and a lot of them die actually on the journey. It's a very difficult journey. A lot of them, you know, children and others are exposed.
It's one of the biggest things they're going to do in their entire life. It's uprooting.
It's bad.
From the place that they were born and raised to somewhere that they don't know.
Right, and there's a lot of uncertainty involved, which is why it's not really fair to anybody, both the people who live here and the people who are coming here. But anyway, the point is that it ain't getting resolved anytime soon, and this is definitely a major standoff, and I am very curious to see how the Biden administration handles, if they're going to escalate it or if they're just going to let it sit kind of where things are. The current stasis is not a terrible situation for Biden because, look, it's to his benefit that less people come in. The Texas governor, I mean, this guy, like, he can ride off this for the rest of his life, I'm telling you. You know, in terms of, like, this has mobilized the right in a way that I haven't seen also in a long time. You got Governor Youngkin, Abbott, Brian Kemp, and all these people like, come on, Governor Abbott, all of this. Abbott's going to be a star, you know, in the Republican Party, riding off of something like this. He wants confrontation with the feds. I wonder if Biden will give it to him or not. I don't really think it's in his interest either. There is no major, as you said, Democratic constituencies like, no, Joe, go stick it to Gregg.
Democrats don't want to think about it.
They don't, exactly. They don't want to think about it. They just kind of want the whole thing to go away. So we'll see.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.